everybody, it's time for another What We Read episode.
That is right.
And we are just going to dive right in and talk about some of our recent reads. So I'm going to kick things off by talking about a book that my friend Kristen from Merrily Kristen recommended like ages ago.
Right.
And it's a book called Sunshine by Robin McKinley. So the main character's name is actually Sunshine, and she finds herself chained up next to a vampire in an abandoned mansion, and she doesn't anticipate the fact that her life is going to change completely when she decides that she's going to help him escape, because he also helped her escape, and it sort of ends up with them teaming up to face a greater evil that eventually is going to come their way.
That's cute. That sounds cute. Okay.
Yeah, it's a little old school. It's a little older as far as I'm aware, but it was still pretty good. I like the way that McKinley wove in her paranormal element into the story. It's set in the modern day, but it's like a fact of life, really, that paranormal beings exist, all kinds of paranormal beings.
Like,
they're just like around them.
Right, cool.
They're not really chill with it per se. They just recognize that
like,
there are.
they're here, it's a thing.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
So basically it's like a thing that everyone is aware of versus like some mythical creature that they know that they're there. They know that they're around. That was really unexpected to me. I don't think I could have foreseen it going the way it did, but you know, it was very welcome. I quite enjoyed seeing how she did that. I also thought that the integration of like a bakery food aspect was really fun into the story as well.
Does the vampire bake?
No, it's not the vampire.
Right.
The main character is actually the baker in it. The one thing that sort of made this one a little harder for me to get through is that the writing can be a little rambly. We're really in the main character's head for the story. That's the perspective we're getting. And she tends to go off on tangents a lot, and so you're also going off on tangents with her. And sometimes the tangents are like flashbacks, and sometimes they're like random things that she's thinking about. And for me, sometimes that could be so distracting because I'm like, but what happened in the main, like what's going on over there, you know? So that part of the writing didn't really sit too well with me. Like it was kind of jarring and kept taking me out of the story. However, because I was immediately intrigued by the main character and sort of what we get to know about her in like the first maybe 2 chapters of the story, because you do get to know a few things, and a few things are hinted about her. If you're not intrigued by that right away or by the world, then you're gonna have an even harder time with this book. For me, those were the 2 things that like kept me going, because I really was curious. I was like, so are we gonna find out about what that means? Like, is there a connection to like what's going on with the vampires? For the most part, the book is less heavy on the action, and it's more just Sunshine struggling through what she's learning about herself and the world around her.
Right.
A lot of the action really only takes place at like the last, I want to say like 15% of the story. And even then, it's not even that like a big explosive action scene. It's just like one big moment that occurs. I still thought it was enjoyable because it's different from other vampire stories I've read, and I really like that a lot. Would I say it's a new favorite? Probably not. It's not necessarily like a very big standout or one that really worked for me personally. So that's what I think about Sunshine. The next book I'm going to talk about is Ariadne, which is by Jennifer Saint. This one is a reimagining of the well-known tale of Ariadne, asking what might have happened to her and her sister Phaedra after the prince Theseus arrives at Crete as a sacrifice determined to slay the Minotaur. This book was not what I expected it to be. And I think a part of that is because I honestly only know the biggest details of the original myth. Maybe it would have been different if I had revisited the myth before I read the story, but because I only knew the big details that most of us know about the story of Ariadne and Theseus and the Minotaur, I thought it was so creative and so interesting, and it felt like Jennifer Saint gave a voice to these women characters that we hadn't really heard much from when the myth is retold, because a lot of it is just about Theseus and his successful slaying of the Minotaur. What I also liked was I didn't realize it was going to be about both sisters. I thought it was just Ariadne. And what I thought that Jennifer Saint did that was super interesting was that she contrasted their lives and how they turned out. So the 2 are already very different in terms of personality, but the circumstances of their lives definitely take them in very different directions as the book continues. And it was just interesting to see like what exactly went on for both of them, because I honestly could not imagine that the directions their lives had taken by the end of the book. The plot turns and the twists, they felt very realistic in terms of, you know, organic storytelling, but also in terms of like what a Greek myth would end up being like. Yeah. I struggled with the ending, even though I knew it wasn't going to be a good ending, because it's Greek myth. Okay, we're retelling a Greek myth. It's not going to end well. Like, there's no way. Especially for the women.
Well, especially, yeah, there's like, very few.
Let's be real here. There are very few women who end up in either powerful or good places at the end of Greek myths. And obviously I should have like kept that in the back of my mind, but I was getting invested and I was like, I kind of want them to get like, you know, what they deserved.
Not quite.
Not quite what happened. But I will say, as a modern take on this myth that, you know, we kind of only know the bare details about, I think Jennifer Saint did a great job with that, and I'm looking forward to checking out her next book, which is about Elektra.
Ooh,
which is going to be so exciting. They just revealed the cover for that, and it looks awesome.
The Greek myth, not the assassin.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Just wanted to...
Just clarifying?
Yeah, because in my head I'm like, not she is. Anyway.
Alright, I will momentarily take a break and pass things over to Mackie so he can discuss
very well. Something that, for the second and probably only other time I'm ever going to do this in my life, presenting one of my favorite things in Alexa's collection of books, the tiny versions of the whole The Throne of Glass saga. Starting with Assassin's Blade, which I have read a couple of What We Reads ago, followed shortly by Throne of Glass, and then of course what I recently read prior to the final, you know, full tilt, face down bobsled slide of a binge, Crown of Midnight. And so, what are we talking about? This is a story of a young assassin, and why not, who happens to be the best, was betrayed, and then now has a chance to sort of like rise up from the ashes of that sort of like betrayal and get fished out of the king's mine in order to sort of like participate in a tournament that allows her to gain some kind of like merit or glory and become the king's assassin. Orchestrated by none other than the Crown Prince himself. And the Crown Prince's best friend / all-time around buddy forever BFF, who also happens to be the captain of the guards. Whilst that screams triangle already, I love how Sarah J. Maas sort of takes things in sort of like whatever directions. Now, I should have said more about this in the previous sort of like piece because it's about characters, but really as an afterthought, the relationships in this book are 100% on brand for Sarah J. Maas, I think. There's a pattern that you will find in the ships that are here. It is time-honored, I want to say is a good word. Mm-hmm. The tropes used are, if anything, gourmet for the fans of this particular thing. And whilst it is not necessarily my cup of tea, I sampled it and I'm like, all right, I get the hype, I get it. I understand why people are like gobbling this up, especially when like forbidden loves and princes who have no business falling in love with certain kinds of people sort of like happen, or captains of the guard, or, you know, witches. It's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. What makes, and as I mentioned earlier, it's the characters and the nature of the characters, and then it is the narrative, right? The story itself. But there are two other legs that the story stands on, and that is Sarah's writing style, and the lore by which she sort of like ties everything together. Now, these two things have a very tenuous sort of like relationship to me as a reader, because again, I kind of don't do the high fantasy 19 pages on just this chair, 45 pages on just the road that we have walked, and the eons that, you know, I'm like, okay, we get it, it's cool, it's fine. Alexa, I mean, Alexa probably has a better view of it because you've read like Eye of the World, you've read, you know, like Tolkien, which is great. I just can't. I can't anymore. And then I just sort of
watch the Wheel of
I
Time.
know I should, but I want to read a little bit, and it's on our shelf. So Sarah's writing voice, which is very contemporary, very today, yes, very in, as Edna Mode would say, it is in the now. You know, I like it. I appreciate it. Mm-hmm. It breathes life into otherwise stuffy type of characters. It's a prince forever with an evil dad. I mean, that's classic. And then it's the captain of the guards who's like, I don't know, I'm just with him. You know, like it's just. You know, and then I'm an assassin, and I'm, you know, without the writing style that Sarah has infused in these characters, without them being in their heads and Sarah breathing life to them in that way and bringing that contemporary sort of like voice to it, I feel like the pacing would suffer greatly. However, the lore in itself is so lush and so rich, and while it's not perfect, whose lore is, I find that any loose ends in the sort of like start when Selena starts discovering, you know, little bits and pieces of like the deeper, you know, or machinations of the world that she sort of like stumbled into, versus where it actually bloody takes you. And while I'm all for God shanking, I feel like we wouldn't have seen the amazing sort of like spin that Sarah has put to the series without that combination of, this is a modern style, but by the way, we're gonna go old-fashioned, old school with making up my own lore and making up my own sort of like universe. And as far as world building is concerned, this is an A for me. Mm-hmm. The style took it in the direction that I can only say is the Sarah J. Maas like
Sarah J. Maas direction.
I've not seen.
No, I kind of want him to read the other series.
I've not seen an author go this hard in the direction that she believes or that they believe is the only direction they want to go.
Now I'm really curious how he's gonna feel.
I almost feel like there is absolutely no pandering to fans here, because Sarah will set something up and then tear it down and then make something come out of nowhere, and I can justify every single choice. Am I happy with it? Not necessarily, but that just means I'm a different kind. But that's the other thing too. But while some people are, and I've heard, heavy on the hate, fine, I can actually justify every single, like, narratively, as a writer myself, and as a consumer, and even as a person who just understands how a story works. I can justify everything that Sarah has done in this entire saga, and why it's important, why it's still true to each character, why it's just magnificent in that sense, which is rare because usually I'm just like, oh, forget it. But here it's just like, it's really great. There were tears until the choices were made by the author that I was just like, yeah, I wouldn't have done that, but all right, we're here now. So again, thank you very much for this very, very, very amazing series. I
can't believe you just went there, but okay.
But she went there first.
True.
So I'm just following in the wake of this. I would say this is a masterpiece, to be frightfully honest. This is like, if you don't want to pander to fans, while at the same time want to pander to, like, to specific fans who think like you, this is the go-to. This is the GOAT, even, I would like to say. It is great. I love it, and I might not reread it, but these characters are going to be living in my head rent-free now, like, forever. And that's okay. That's okay. Because I have eviction plans that are fun, and they come back anyway, but it's nice
I have eviction.
Yeah, it's nice to kick them out, and then they come back in, and then they kick them out, and they come back in. Yeah, it's one of those things. So yeah, read it.
The next book I'm going to talk about is The Deep, which is by Rivers Solomon, with David Diggs, William Hutton, and Jonathan Snipes. This is actually inspired by a song that the band Clipping, consisting of those three fellows down there, did. This is basically what Rivers drew out from that story already and turned it into something of his own. So the main character is named Yatu, and she is the designated historian of her people, who are underwater living descendants of pregnant African slaves who were thrown overboard on overseas crossings. And so she is the one who carries all of the difficult, traumatic memories of their past, but when the memories threaten to overwhelm and destroy her, she actually flees to the surface to escape them.
Wow.
And she actually learns more about the past in the process. First of all, my recommendation is that have both the physical and the audiobook, because I really enjoyed listening to the audiobook. It's narrated by David Diggs. He really brings Yatu's story to life, and he kind of captures the exact nuances and emotions of what River Solomon is portraying in his work. But I do feel like it would have been beneficial to me to have the physical copy to flip through while I was listening to it, just so I wouldn't get so lost, and I'll get to that in a second. The first thing that I find really striking about this is that it obviously explores the idea of collective and shared trauma, and how that is such a heavy and difficult but also essential thing in informing people about who they are and where they came from. And I think that the way Rivers does it is in a very thoughtful way. It was really hard to hear at times, and obviously not the easiest listen, not the most comfortable listen, but it really just hit hard when it was meant to hit hard. I love that aside from just being thematically interesting, there was also this very compelling world and these fantastical elements that just, I don't know, it just made it something that drew me right in as I was puzzling it all together and trying to figure out, like, you know, what this world was about, what these characters were and what they were going through, or who these characters were and what they were going through. And, you know, it was just very compelling and sort of whimsical, but also powerful. And that is not an easy feat, considering this book is so short too. Like, that is not an easy feat to accomplish, and River Solomon definitely succeeded in that. The reason that I had said earlier that it would have been more beneficial to me to actually have this on hand while I was listening to it was because we do jump around in the timelines a bit. Like, we see Yatu and what she's going through in the present, but we also get glimpses of the past. We see other experiences, some of them the experiences that Yatu is already carrying. And so it could get a little confusing, like, until I reoriented myself. Sometimes I'd be like, what is happening and where are we? Like, when are we? Who are we with? In a way, it works for this story because it sort of just feeds into the idea that, you know, this history is a shared history. It is something that shaped who Yetu and the people around her community are today. And like, that is the most powerful thing you can take away from this story. What I did end up doing after I finished reading it was I actually went back and listened to the original track, that clipping.
Oh, okay, okay.
But they actually took inspiration from someone else as well.
Wow.
And it's honestly it's so fascinating to me, just the creative process of like, they built on someone else's, you know, work, and then River Solomon built on their work. And it's just like, they added something different each time. So it was really, really cool.
That's cool.
I'm glad I finally got around to reading this one. Would definitely recommend. Now we're gonna move into sort of more wholesome territory.
Definitely more wholesome.
Lighter territory. So I finally read Kiki's Delivery Service by Aiko Kadono. This is the book, obviously, that the Studio Ghibli film is based on. And it was so delightful. So, main character Kiki, she's 13 years old. She's a half witch, and now it is time for her to try and embrace the witch's tradition of finding a new town to settle in and carving out a place for herself there. Kiki is pretty confident about her ability to do this, except that things don't quite go the way she anticipates when she finds her new home, and it's up to her to find the courage and sort of the inner strength to, you know, still forge that path for herself. And obviously, I was very delighted by the story. It has a lot of the familiar elements that, you know, Hayao Miyazaki pulled from the book to put into the film. The setting, some of the characters, some of the plots, a lot of it is in there. I will say that Kiki in the film is a little bit toned down when it comes to the sass. Like, she's sassy, but she's not book Kiki sassy. Because like, book Kiki sassy was a whole like unexpected thing for me. I was like, well, someone has a bit of wit there.
And rightfully so.
Kind of, I really enjoyed it. There were other parts of the book that I guess, you know, I get why they weren't integrated into the film. There's like a cohesiveness to the animation that obviously exist for a reason, but there were some other things that happened in terms of the plot that were really enjoyable and just fun and kind of fit right into like the mental image I had of Kiki and her sort of coming of age story. And considering this book was written before I was even born, like it came out in 1985, it actually holds up pretty well. I love the fact that it still holds up as a coming of age story for someone who's a little younger.
Aww.
It's just about finding your place in the world and helping other people out. It's really slice of life if you think about it. Like, the fantastical elements are all, you know, delightful and charming, but they're actually a very small part of the story.
That's true.
The real big part is like Kiki learning to be independent and learning to find her way in the world. And being confident in who she is, and finding her own self-worth. And that was a really fun journey to go on. And I'm so glad I finally read this book.
She's lovely.
But speaking of Studio Ghibli, the last book we're going to talk about today is Howl's Moving Castle, which is the first in the series by Diana Wynne Jones. I finally read this book, so I have also seen the Ghibli film. I enjoy it. It's not like my favorite Ghibli film. I know it's like popular with a lot of people, and I know a lot of people love Howl. Not my personal favorite. So I was a little like nervous going into the book because I know that people love it so much. I actually really liked the book as well. So,
why so?
The premise of the book is obviously that the main character, Sophie, she gets cursed by the Witch of the Wastes, and she decides to seek help from the wizard Howl, who lives in a moving castle, with his apprentice Michael and a fire demon named Calcifer.
Yes.
And they kind of end up on an adventure together instead. What do you expect, really?
Sometimes help is on
magical shenanigans. Again, you can kind of see all of the elements that Miyazaki pulled from the story to integrate into his film. There were some that he didn't include, and again, same thing with Kiki. Like, I could see why. Like,
yeah, there are choices
the
you
movie
have to
is
make
very
for the format.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the movie has its own like cohesive story, and it didn't suffer too much from like the things that weren't included. But having those things included in the book made it actually really interesting to me, because I don't know, I think it just added an extra depth in some areas that I felt like the movie had been lacking, personally. There's a far larger cast of characters, which I did not anticipate happening, and that made for a very entertaining set of segues. And I also was obviously surprised because I thought I had known the story pretty well, and a lot of like the big parts of it are definitely here. Like, a lot of the big scenes and exchanges happen here as well. I really enjoyed Sophie in this book as well. She's still just like she is in the movie, where she's like super fiercely independent, and like at some point she's just like, I don't really care what your opinion is, I'm still gonna do it because I think it's the right thing to do, or I need to do it.
Right.
And she just goes head first into like whatever it is, even if it's magical and she's not really magical herself. Just imagine same Sophie, the level of magical shenanigans in the movie, and then add more magical shenanigans on top of that.
And who doesn't want that?
It's very chaotic, but that's what I love about it. I think I'm just a sucker for stories where it's like, there's magical chaos, and now we're just gonna have to wade our way through it to get to the end.
That's wonderful.
So it was really, really fun to finally read this, and I actually think I'm going to read the rest of the series because I am really curious now after the, you know, everything. Even though technically you could read this and just treat it as a standalone. So
yeah,
very glad that I also got to this one as well, and it was just so much fun. I'm so glad I read it. Those are all the books that we are talking about in today's What We Read episode. If you have any thoughts, comments, questions, leave them down below. You can also find all our social media links down there, and we'll see you guys for a new video soon. Bye!